drive, walk, sit, all active verbs, which are important to your writing. Using active verbs with active voice for the majority of your sentences makes your meaning clear for your readers, keeping sentences from becoming too complicated or wordy. This is an important skill to master so that you can communicate your stories clearly. So let's dive into this next part of this series on writing what you mean. Hello writers in training, I'm Shannon, writing under the pen name SD Huston and author of Blood of the Lily and Soul of a Rose. And welcome to my channel where I show writers like you how to develop your writing skills and self-publish your work. For many years, I taught college English and literature and ran my own business as a writing coach. So I'm bringing my knowledge and experience to this series. This concept all starts with word choices and sentence constructions. And this series will have one core concept. Every word is important. But sometimes we can write a completely correct and grammatical sentence and its meaning is gibberish. Like this sentence here, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Maybe this is a little too easy to see how it's not clear. What about this sentence? The complex houses married and single soldiers and their families. Did the houses marry the soldiers? Or maybe it's a complex which offers homes to married and single soldiers. If you have to think about what a sentence is truly trying to say, then it's not clear and you'll lose your readers. With this in mind, let's see how we can improve our sentence clarity to communicate effectively with the readers. Common clarity problems come from the structure of sentences. Sentence structure starts with word choices. These clarity problems with word choices often stem from nouns, verbs, modifiers, and pronouns. Don't remember the parts of speech? I will not be giving the definitions of these. So if you don't recall the parts of speech, I suggest reviewing these before continuing. We've already looked at concrete and abstract nouns in a previous video. So this time we're going to look at verbs. More specifically, active voice versus passive voice. To understand the difference between active and passive voice, you'll need to remember that verbs can be action verbs or a state of being. Action verbs include words such as go, walk, run. Verbs of being include be, am, is, are, was, were, being, and been. Passive voice often includes verbs of being. Use of the passive voice is not a grammatical error, but it can decrease clarity. A verb is in the passive voice when the subject of the sentence is acted on by the verb. It indicates what is receiving action, not who or what is doing the action. For example, the ball was thrown by the pitcher. The ball, the subject, receives the action of the verb and was thrown is in the passive voice. The same sentence cast in the active voice would be the pitcher threw the ball. The doer of the action is now at the front of the sentence. There are two clues when passive voice is being used. The first clue is always true. The verb takes the form of a to be plus past tense transitive verb, such as was thrown. The second clue is sometimes true. The sentence has a by phrase. The cat was brushed by Laura. It is usually preferable to use the active voice whenever possible because it gives a sense of immediacy to sentences. This becomes almost essential when you want to write an action scene or scene with suspense. You want the most active sentences you can write. Let's look at this example from my own writing, which I purposefully filled with passive voice first. At the sound of Cronus's voice, Lily leapt to her feet. She spun on her heel, and the Titan's middle was speared by her sword. He grunted. The sword was yanked free, the blade clean, and it was dropped at her feet. In the second sentence of this paragraph, I have both the to be verb plus past transitive verb combination and the by phrase. In the last sentence, there are two verb plus past tense transitive verb combinations, and the doer of the action, Cronus, is never even mentioned. Here's the rewritten passage as it appears in my manuscript for Tears of the Marigold, the third book in my Clash of Goddesses series. At the sound of Cronus's voice, Lily leapt to her feet, spun on her heel, and slammed her sword through the Titan's middle. He grunted. He barely looked at her as he yanked the sword free, the blade clean, and dropped it at her feet. If you're writing anything with a definitive subject who's performing an action, you should use the active voice. You can search your document for instances of the verbs of being, and if your page lights up with instances of passive voice, it may be a good idea to switch to active voice. Note that there are times when the passive voice does a better job of presenting an idea, but these occur most often in formal, professional, and legal discussions. Some writers take advantage of this shift in emphasis that passive voice provides, for instance, in trying to avoid getting blamed. The classic example made by politicians: mistakes were made. However, there are other reasons for using passive voice. It can be used to emphasize an object, as in this sentence. 100 votes are required to pass the foot deodorizing bill. This passive sentence emphasizes the number of votes required and not the foot deodorizing bill. Or passive voice can be used to de-emphasize an unknown subject or actor. A baby dragon was delivered to the abbey yesterday morning. This is useful if you don't know who delivered the dragon. Last, passive voice could be used if your readers don't need to know who's responsible for the action. A half a dozen balloons and flowers have been arranged around the hospital room. This could be rewritten in the active voice to say, the nurse arranged a half a dozen balloons and flowers around the hospital room. But if the nurse is not an important part of the story, then the focus does not need to be on them, but on the fact that there are balloons and flowers arranged around the room. Let's look at a published example that uses passive voice. Jane Austen favors using passive voice to poke fun at her characters in a polite way. He pressed them so cordially to dine at Barton Park every day till they were better settled at home, that though his entreaties were carried to a point of perseverance beyond civility, they could not give offense. Austen could have rephrased this sentence like so. Though Mr. Middleton carried his entreaties to a point of perseverance beyond civility, they could not give offense. Though maybe she means something closer to, Mr. Middleton pushed his invitation beyond the point of politeness and into pushiness, but he still meant well. In cases like this, the passive voice allows for more polite phrasing, even if it's also a little less clear. Hopefully you see the differences now in active voice and passive voice, and you can make deliberate choices in your writing to achieve the effect you want. Next, we're going to talk about modifiers. During my time as a teacher and writing coach, this is the one area that I saw needing the most improvement, although passive voice came in at a close second place. If you haven't seen the video before this one in this series about concrete and abstract nouns, I recommend checking that one out next. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and happy writing.